Well, hey, how's it going, church family, and anyone else who happened to stumble across this daily Devo? So glad you are hanging out with us. For the next few weeks, as we wrap up the book of Philippians, I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse because a lot of these are themes that we have covered before, but they are important themes, so they bear repeating. This week, we're going to be talking about how we should respond and conduct ourselves in an environment that's not always accommodating or even sometimes hostile to our Christian faith. And next week, we're going to be talking about being content, both in times of abundance and in times of lack. So do me a favor, pause the video here, read Philippians 4, verse 4 through 9, and if you don't have a Bible handy, as always, we'll try to throw a link in the description that will take you to that passage. So go ahead and pause, and then come on back and we'll chat. So Paul is in prison for spreading the good news about Christ, and he writes to a people who live in a culture that is completely steeped in idol worship, perversion, and hedonism. What's more, the Christians of that region were facing discrimination and persecution. This is not an ideal environment for the early Christians that called that city home. So, under these circumstances, it is a little unusual that Paul would tell them to rejoice. So important it is that he tells them twice. What in the world would they have to rejoice over? The thing is that they had something that their neighbors didn't have. They had hope in Christ and an assurance that despite their current hardships, they would be on the winning side and they would inherit a reward that was far greater than anything they could ever lose this side of eternity. Was there plenty for them to be anxious about? Yeah, absolutely. They lived in a world that was hostile to them. Their neighbors looked on them with contempt and suspicion, and the future was very uncertain. Does that sound a little bit familiar? Maybe just a touch. Now, I don't think Christians in America are necessarily a persecuted people group. We might have lost a few privileges that we've had in yesteryears, but I don't think we're discriminated. In fact, I think if the Philippians saw what we would call persecution, they would probably laugh at us. I just don't think that omitting jingle bells and snowmen on our holiday Christmas cups is something that counts as persecution. And certainly last year there have been times where it has definitely been uncomfortable. It's definitely been an inconvenience, or we have been inconvenienced in expressing our faith as we navigate this pandemic and trying to keep people safe. But I just don't think that counts as persecution. It is as close as we have gotten, at least in my lifetime. But Paul tells us to rejoice in those times. It's always during times of hardships for the Christian church that we have always exploded. We have always been at our best. And so that is definitely a reason to rejoice. And we can rejoice for the same reason that the Philippians can rejoice, is that we have a greater hope. And we know that on the other side of eternity is going to be so much better than our best day this side of eternity. Now, as he concludes this section by urging the Philippians to put into practice what they have seen from Paul and encouraging them that the God of peace would be with them. Now, I've spoken about biblical peace before, and that's what is called shalom. And it's so important to remember that whenever we see that word peace in the Bible, it means so much more than just the absence of violence. It means being in a state of well-being between you and God, and you and other people, and you and creation, really. So how can we put this into practice? My youth pastor, Jim, used to tell us a story about dogfighting. Now, I don't think he was a dogfighter, but it was a pretty cool metaphor. let's say you have two dogs. You have a good dog and you have a bad dog, and they're both about to fight each other. Which dog do you think is going to win? Probably the best fed dog, right? So you feed the bad dog by consuming media that is toxic for your soul. Pornography, websites that peddle conspiracy theories and distortions of the truth. Maybe it's an overconsumption of social media, or maybe even political news commentary. And I'm just going to camp out there for a second. I hate talking about political stuff, but gosh, we live in such a politically charged world right now. And it is really being driven by the political commentators. And they really have one job. It's not to inform you of the truth. That is the last thing that they're trying to do, is inform you of the truth. Political commentators want to instead motivate you to act or believe a certain way. And the best way to bring that about is to make the other guy, whoever that is, your enemy. They're out to get you. Political commentators will spin the truth in any way that they can to make that happen. And it's just as true for commentators for a network that is on one side of the political spectrum as it is for a network that is on the other side of the political spectrum. And if you don't think that your favorite political commentator is spinning the truth and trying to get you to make an enemy out of other people, well, I've got news for you. They are. They definitely are. But we are Christians, and we're not called to make enemies out of other people made in the image and likeness of God. In fact, we are to love and pray and serve those who would even set themselves as enemies against us. I know that as Southern Baptists, we don't typically celebrate Lent, which is a shame because there's something valuable about fasting from something that typically distracts us from God and feasting on Him, especially in the days leading up to Easter as we're preparing our hearts for that awesome holiday in which Christ raises from the dead, or at least we celebrate Him rising from the dead. This year, I have decided to fast from media, social media except for work, YouTube, other than maybe some sermons or some Christian podcasts that will draw me closer to God rather than distract me from Him. But most importantly, I've decided to fast from my gluttonous consumption of online news. I'm going to fast from watching my favorite political commentator, which I probably shouldn't even be watching in the first place. And I'm going to choose to dwell on things that are true and noble and right and pure, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. And I would like to challenge you to examine the media, the TV shows, and movies that you watch that are feeding that bad dog. Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's Devo. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and God bless.